All right, so inner observer reliability is the extent to which two or more observers are consistent with each other when independently measuring the same thing. Correlations can be used to quantify inner observer reliability, so looking at how observers are using the measurement and how correlated the two measurement observers are.
Can do something special. This is a big dive. Tariff of 3.7, it was...
Okay, so an example of inner observer reliability might be something like the Olympics. So we wouldn't have just one person judging a dive, right? There's a panel of three people who are putting up different scores, and we can see how closely they are related to each other. And if there's any wide discrepancies, we might question the judge's competence. So we can measure this inter-rater reliability by looking at the number of agreements over the total number of agreements and disagreements multiplied 100. And you don't necessarily need to remember that formula, but just so you know what you're looking at. So in this scenario, we've got looking at positive interaction rater number 1 and positive interaction rater number 2. This looks like a measure of parent-child interaction therapy. We could see at 5 minutes, both of the raters rated the same. At 15 minutes, both of the raters rated the same. At 25 minutes, both of the raters rated the same. And 30 minutes, they rated the same. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 agreements over 6 observations total. So we would say that there's a 67% overlap of the inter-raters reliability. So when testing reliability, again, you don't necessarily need to remember this, but it's going to be a resource to you on your slides. So again, above 0.8 is outstanding. So if we've got something that's got above 0.8 reliability, it's something that you would definitely use and something that's shown to be reliable. 6 to 7.9 is substantial, and 0.4 to 0.59 is moderate. So generally, anything above 0.70 is considered to be strong agreement. As opposed to judging an Olympic dive, there's going to be a video on the forum for this week that I'd like for you to watch and report on what you viewed as the number of open-ended questions versus reflections. So hopefully as clinicians, you know the difference between an open-ended question and a reflection. So reflection would kind of just be repeating back what somebody said for clarification, versus an open-ended question might have been, how was that for you? So I'd like for you to watch this video and just comment on how many open-ended questions versus reflections that you'd heard. And again, I'll put this up on the discussion forum. All right, so in addition to reliability, now we've got to cover validity. So validity is whether or not an instrument's measuring what you want it to. It's ultimately the accuracy of the measure. So a measure may be reliable, but if you're not measuring what you want to measure, then it's kind of pointless, right? So I talked about measuring my head circumference to look at my intelligence, and that's a reliable measure, right? Every time I take my head circumference, it's going to be the same, but it's got nothing to do with my intelligence, right? So measuring my head circumference would be definitely a reliable measure of intelligence, but not valid. With validity, we're trying to get at the bullseye of what we're trying to measure for that concept, right? So if I'm going to take my height and using a tape measure, that's going to be a valid measurement. It's going to be the same every time, so it's going to have reliability. But we also know that it's valid because it's been proven that with the tape measure, we're going to get the same results every time, and it's going to be measuring the construct of my height. But in social sciences, it's a little bit more complicated, right? So measuring depression is going to be a lot more challenging because there's a lot more dimensions to depression than something like head circumference. So let's look at this example here. If all three of these arrows represent different client readiness for change, which one is the most valid? It looks like the arrow that's closest to the bullseye, right? We're trying to get as close to that concept that we're trying to measure as possible here. So just like reliability, we're trying to eliminate random measurement error. With validity, we're trying to eliminate systematic measurement error. So systematic measurement error is a tendency to err in a particular direction. So these are things that we can probably do more about. So if we know that the measure is displaying any invalidity for a certain culture or a specific group of people, then that would be a systematic error, or maybe the administration is being done wrong. All these things are things that we can prevent and things that we can work to improve. So I'll post a few different examples in my slides, but one might just be looking at child neglect. So how would you go about defining what child neglect is? That could be hard to come up with a valid description in itself. And again, maybe there's different cultural components that go into this. But what about just asking about these questions, right? Because if we're asking a parent whether or not their child has had enough to eat over the past week, you could see how if somebody was neglecting their child, they might be really hesitant to answer that question. So what might be a way to improve the validity of asking that question? One way might be to ask the child themselves, see if they felt like they've gotten enough food over the past week. Another way might be to measure their body weight to see if they are healthy and have gotten enough to eat. So just by asking the parent, we might have some systematic error there because they might want to preserve their integrity as a parent, and they might not want to show that they are neglecting their child because there's huge consequences of that, right? So just like with reliability, there's different types of validity. And at the most basic level is face validity. This is exactly what it sounds like, whether or not a measure is valid on its face. So if we're looking at a measure of marital or partner satisfaction, and the questions where I feel my partner is affectionate enough, I feel that my partner and I get along very well together, and I feel that my partner is a comfort to me, I would say that this looks valid on its face, right? These all look like they're related to marital or partner satisfaction. All right, but let's look at a second example of child maltreatment. So content validity is a little bit more challenging, right? Because if you're looking at child maltreatment, you would want items that are related to a number of different variables related to maltreatment, right? Because maltreatment could fall under a bunch of different categories: physical, emotional, social harm, basic needs, medical care. If we're going to try to measure child maltreatment, we want to make sure that we cover that whole range of items that fall under child maltreatment, not just a few questions about physical abuse or sexual abuse, right? So in order to get the entire content that we would need to look at that measure of child maltreatment, we'd want to cover the whole range of possible items that it could be looking at what child maltreatment is as we define it. Okay, so one more example of criterion validity. So this is the ability of a measure to predict an individual's performance on certain outcomes or criteria. Concurrent validity, an example of this might be looking at two different measures that we know are measuring the same construct, right? So if we're looking at one measure of depression, let's say it's the Beck Depression Inventory, and looking at a different measure of depression, if both of them are saying that the person meets the cutoff for depression, then we could say that there's concurrent validity because two measures are giving us the same results, right? But like that, there's also predictive validity. So an example of this might be the ACT. I know that some of you probably think the ACT was stupid or taking the GRE was stupid, but the purpose of those tests is to predict what? Future college performance, right? So this test is going to give us an idea of how ready somebody is for college. So in addition to their GPA from high school, we'd give this test to see, are they competent enough to perform well at our school? And that should give you some predictive validity to how they're going to perform at a university level. So just like reliability, there's standards for looking at validity estimates. Again, you don't need to memorize these, but it's similar to correlation, where 0.9 is very good, 0.8 or to 0.9 is good, 0.71 to 0.8 is acceptable, and 0.7 or less is poor. So a couple closing questions. Is reliability or validity the most important property of a measure? I'll just say that it's validity, right? Because we could be measuring my head circumference and it's going to be reliable, right? But if it's not valid, then what's the point? So how can the validity of a measure differ depending on race, ethnicity, gender, age, and sexual orientation of a client? Maybe this is something that we could post to the discussion board because there's a lot of different ways that this could go. And I definitely value your feedback and what you think about this.